Most struggling watercolor beginners either abandon a watercolor painting halfway through, or they finish the painting but then realize that they actually don't like it. And then they just jump straight into something else. And that one habit is exactly what's keeping them stuck. Not lack of practice or lack of talent, just not really knowing what to do when things don't go as planned. And after over 10 years of painting with watercolor and going from work that looks like this to work that looks like that, and teaching watercolor painting to thousands of students, I found that the people who improve the fastest and also get to see the paintings that I actually want to see on paper, they all have one thing in common. And the skill is this: you really want to develop the ability to look at your painting while you're painting it or after you finished it and ask yourself, what is working, what's not working, and what can I do differently so I actually get the results I want. That's it. That's the conversation that you want to have with your painting. And this is what really helps to not just learn about painting, but really to create the paintings that you envision, that you want to see, and be proud of the end result that you are after. Because it's not about the perfect result, it's in those moments where you pause, look closely, and figure out what to do next. So let me show you exactly what it looks like by walking you through some of my own projects. And then you'll also see all the different stages and how I look at my paintings, what I do with them, and how I moved to the final version where I felt like, okay, this is good enough. All right, let's start with something recent. So this is one of the painting projects we did inside my watercolor membership Teal. We painted this beautiful blue macaw step by step. But before we actually painted that, I took some time to figure out what I wanted to paint, how I wanted to paint that. So my very first step to that project was actually this, because I actually found a reference image of a different bird, and I really liked this bird because it had like different types of blue shades. So it was like a little bit of warmer blue, a little bit of cooler, greener blue. But as I was painting it, I didn't feel it. Like we were not clicking somehow in that moment, even though I really like this picture. Maybe I'll come back to it later because I still think it's a beautiful bird and beautiful colors. But it was important for me to just put paint to paper and kind of get a feel for it, because sometimes we can get stuck so much in finding the perfect reference or thinking about, should I paint that or this, maybe this one or maybe that one, and we just spend too much time deciding. So that's why I put first the paint to paper to realize, okay, I didn't feel like painting that, but I had a different reference image that I found, and I decided, okay, let's try that other one, because this one I felt like there was just too many little feathers, and I wanted to paint something where the feathers were larger. And that's why I picked a different reference, which was the final painting that I showed you in the beginning. So the next step was, okay, let me choose the other reference and just create again the first kind of blob of color. Like, so here I was just basically just quickly painted the feathers, and you can see I only focused on the feather part and didn't add any details. And as I was painting that, again, I wasn't really like fully in the zone. I was rushing it too much and realized, okay, I don't like how this is just too blurry, it's too simplified. I want to really spend a little bit more time refining the details, because I like to paint loosely but also have still enough detail in my paintings. So it's kind of like realism but not hyper realistic or hyper realism. It's loose enough that it's kind of loose, but it still has enough detail that it's more on the realistic side. And sometimes it also depends on your mood and how much time you want to spend on the project. So here I decided, okay, I don't want it to be so quickly. I don't want it to just rush the project, rush the process. So I decided, okay, let's focus on just how would I paint the feathers in a more detailed way. So that's how I began, with just the feathers itself. Like you can see, I painted something else before and I had some space left and decided, okay, let's just look at the feathers. Like, how would I do that? Actually use a different reference. It was exactly similar to these feathers. And just decided, okay, how would I do this? I want to make it soft. I don't want to spend time painting every single feather in too much detail. And started just painting more like wet into wet, slightly damp on damp. And I said, okay, let's see how can I do it in a way that I have different colors. So I had some green colors here, some more mid blue colors, a little bit more purplish blue colors, some greenery again. So just different versions of all these different blues. One leaning more towards green, other a little bit more towards purple. And as I was finishing that, I felt like it was just too blurry. It needed a little bit more detail, because sometimes we kind of skip certain parts or rush certain parts. Sometimes you just feel maybe a little lazy to paint that in a way like where it requires you a little bit more time. But actually, sometimes it's good to just, okay, let's not rush. Let's really focus on some of the details. This was the next step where I was, okay, let's focus on some feathers that are a little bit more in, like a little bit more detail, so they are more in focus. And everything else, I move into the distance a little bit more blurry. So the feathers here in the front stand out more. And I actually really liked it here because I had like these more darker elements here. They're a little bit more blurry. And here I have a little bit harder edges. But I felt like, okay, this is a little bit too dark. And I think I prefer it more when it's a little bit lighter. So the next stage, I paint it again. And you can see I'm not painting a huge painting. I actually just focus on like one single piece. And these could be totally like, bookmarks, a bookmark size. So you don't need to use a huge sheet of paper or anything like that. So this time you can see I made the color slightly lighter. So I focused, okay, let's make sure that maybe the light comes from this side. It's a little bit lighter. You can see I made the lines here also more blurry. So they're a little bit more in distance, a little bit out of focus. And also like it's curved. So it's not super focused here. And then the main focal point would be these feathers right here. And I shaped them with this kind of like a negative space where I darkened some of the parts where the feathers overlap. So it creates a little bit of this depth. And everything else here, again, you can see it has these blurry lines again. So I have this contrast between light and dark and soft edges and hard edges. So the soft edges really make it look like it's blurry, and your eyes naturally go towards the more harder edges. So everything that has this crisp outline. So here, this is a bit blurry and doesn't stand out as much. And this was the painting that I did for a recorded lesson, where I used everything that I kind of learned and understood from my painting process. So I took all I want it to be, I have some elements more in focus. I want to have light and dark colors. And I want to have blurry lines. I want hard edges, but I also want to make sure I have a little bit more variety in the colors. So maybe have a little bit more like, more colorful colors. So because here it's a little bit more bluer. Here I have a little bit more of this green kind of color shining through a little bit more. And it's not like one is better than the other. They're different. And depending on what you paint, you might prefer certain colors, certain effects. But again, this is important to really get clarity around that by just painting a few different drafts where you're still kind of like fine-tuning your vision, fine-tuning what you want to paint, how you want to paint that. Because if you just like spend time just thinking about your reference, how you would paint that, over perfect it in your head, it won't look the same. Like you can't just immediately translate that on paper, because you need to connect your brain with your hand. The hand needs to go with the paper, and it's all this collaboration. And that's why it's important to put pen to paper and then analyze, okay, I really like how this turned out. I like how the colors transition from this color to the other. And here I think it's a little bit too dark. Let me make it brighter next time. And you have like something to work with where you can look at it and identify, not in your head, something that's abstract. You want to have something in front of you, like here, you have a painting that you can work with. So you can see the transition from like just quickly dark, moving closer and closer to something that, okay, I think I like it. of course, like sometimes I come back to a painting or a project where I'm like, okay, I think I don't like this after all. Like I did it in a way that this one stands out. I should have done it a little bit differently. But again, this is just where your eyes adjust, your technique adjusts, you get more and more clarity, you see more, you understand more, and then you can always continue fine-tuning your paintings. And this is also important where you then practice your watercolor skills, because if you're just starting out and you're just new to watercolor, you might not have the knowledge of, okay, but how do I make it look this way? Or how do I even know it needs to be different? And how do I change that? So that's why I always teach my students the foundations of watercolor and explain like how to use that in your paintings. Because if you just paint, sometimes you don't have like maybe even the knowledge of like actually, yeah, I do need some elements that are more in focus and others a little bit more blurry. And then, okay, how do I do this? Okay, I need to make sure that I paint wet on wet or damp on damp instead of wet on dry. Okay, but how do I avoid any patchiness when I do this? So this is what I always go over in my membership and my courses. And I teach my students all these steps, because then you can really paint and identify, okay, now I can see the difference between when it's too dark, when it's too light, when there's not enough contrast, and know exactly how to tweak that. And from there, I moved on to painting the bird. Now I have the first quick painting that I did after, I think this one that I showed you here was this bird. And you can see it's similar to this bird here, but I had actually finished some of the parts. I had the face here, I had the, yeah, just more added here. But still, I didn't like fully how I painted that, because I decided, okay, something is off here. And sometimes you need to take a break and come back to the painting to see, because as you paint, you're like, actually, like I like it, but there's something off. And when you come back to it later, or when you, for example, take a picture of your painting and look at it through your phone, or sometimes I hold it against the mirror and look at the mirror and see my painting, and then I can see that this needs to be changed. And here, for example, I just didn't like the contrast between the feathers themselves and these little lines. So it just stands out too much. Like it's a little bit too distracting, because the feathers usually are more soft, they're all blend together, there's light and dark, and it's very soft, very delicate. And here I felt like the details are just too visible, just too strong. So the next step, I introduced a little bit more variety. So I also made some areas, for example, like lighter, some are darker. I had more colors. You can see here it's relatively blue, maybe a little bit of green here. But I decided, no, I want to make, again, more colors, like similar to here. I want to have more like a bluish green. I have more purple, a little bit mid blue. And I painted that. I introduced some background just to test how would it look like with a background. And just kept it simple, because sometimes I know it's so scary to paint the background and maybe worried you ruin it or something like that. But when you have something detailed as your main object, a simple background wet on wet helps just to connect it with the surrounding. And in this case, I just painted a very simple like bouquet effect type of background with some greenery, so some trees and some sky, some clouds and here and there. But again, the issue still was there. Like I get here also, like I felt like something is off. I'm not feeling it. Something is like, I mean, I liked it. I liked the greenery in the background, but something was off. And again, this just felt a little bit too, you can see I made those lines a little lighter in the overall differences here from light to dark as well. But these dark lines that I added, like this middle part in the feathers, was again just too distracting for me. It felt like it's more like a scale, like from fish, not so much like feathers, like a soft feathers. It just didn't feel like feathers to me. So my next goal was, okay, I have the background. I figured out, okay, this is how I want to paint the head and the transitions here. How can I blend this together? Okay, the wood, I spent a little bit more time here to paint that here. I kind of rushed it. Also here, I rushed it. So main focal point was, okay, how do I paint the body? So the next painting was this here. And here you can see the difference. Now, I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's all about like they're all different and everything, every painting has their own like elements that just look maybe slightly better or you prefer more, but they're just different. And because I got all the clarity and knowledge from these paintings, I used everything that I learned in this painting. You can see I made sure I have variations in some of the colors. I mean, it's not super like completely different where I can see pink and green or something like that, but I have lights and darks. I really softened the edges of the feathers and really just toned down the lines. I mean, it looks a little bit darker compared to this bird. It could be like maybe it's not lit by light as much, but I just wanted the softness. Like, how can I make it softer? So you can see I, again, used the same techniques that I used here, just made it slightly darker and just made those lines less visible, more blurry. I softened some of the edges even here. I softened the edge of the head because I realized it just looks too cut out. I want to make sure that it feels like it's, again, going into the distance. It's curved, it's blurry. So I softened these edges right here as well. And the background here is a little bit more less vibrant as this green, but it still works. So that's why it's all important to just put paint to paper. Whenever you paint, you don't need to paint as large as I did here. And you can see I just started with the feathers themselves on a small scale. You can also paint smaller, but because the feathers are relatively large, I felt like if I paint too small, it would be maybe more challenging. So I chose this size. And then during the painting party, inside my membership, I painted a fourth version. And this was the result. You can see, again, as I said here, I made this a little bit too dark. I like kind of like something in between where it's light and dark and softness, hard edges, soft edges. And we painted this. Now, this one was painted during the live session. So whenever I paint live and explain as I teach, I'm not so fully in the zone as I would paint just by myself. So my paintings that I create during a live session are slightly different, but you can see all the knowledge that went into it. I have, again, the variety in different blues, greens, purples, soft edges, hard edges. I made something a little bit more blurry than before. I spent more time on some of the feathers and things like that. Here, I think I forgot some of the softening of these edges because sometimes when you paint too long and you just don't see anything anymore. Like, you need to step back and come back to it and soften a little bit. But I also made the face a little bit lighter because this is a little bit, like, it felt like he became more and more angry. So here I made it a little bit lighter again, and yeah, just changed things a little bit. So that's why it's important to put paint to paper and get closer and closer to the version that's like, okay, I really like how this works together. Like, even here, this greenery here, I painted that and I realized, no, I actually prefer it when it's like more here, more blue sky, less of this green. Having that as your kind of reference helps to get clarity, helps to fine tune what you like, what you don't like, and learn from every painting. And this also gives you the chance to practice watercolor painting, where you not only practice, okay, how can I make this look different, tweak that, but you practice the techniques that are required to create the painting you're after. Because if you just jump around between this project, that project, and this didn't work out, and that didn't work out, you don't allow yourself to practice and really hone and adjust your skills, really refine your skills and refine the way of you painting it. I have lots of different stacks of these projects that I painted, tried multiple times, and this is one of the projects of a poppy field where I wanted to paint a beautiful poppy field, but it's not look like too vibrant, it's not super detailed. I was looking for how can I capture like a soft, glowy, breathing version, because sometimes I see, like, even for example, when you paint with oil or acrylic, it's more difficult to achieve that look because the paint just sits there. Because in watercolor, you can really let the pigment move and spread out and do its thing, and you get this looseness automatically. So in this case, I focus on wet into wet. I focus on how can I make the clouds look soft but still like make them look like they're moving. And I didn't get here immediately. I had, again, bunch of different projects that was just random. Like, I think this one I didn't even finish because it was just too pale. I used it as a just swatching paper in the end. You can see this was a little bit too dark. I was like, okay, this is not working here. I rushed the process. I didn't like how it was too gloomy. So I really next time focused on how can I make it more vibrant so it doesn't turn out too gloomy. So I have more of that light and greenery involved here. Here, I don't even know what happened. I think I tried to, maybe I paint like more detailed with the negative space. Here, I don't even know what happened. It's just, again, just for swatching now. And I have like smaller versions. You can see this one was already slightly on the bigger side, but I started small because I know it's sometimes scary or you don't want to use up too much of your good supplies. And that's totally understandable. And that's why I encourage my students to start small. You don't need to paint a huge painting. If you have a sheet of paper, a pad, just divide it in smaller sections and practice your skills. Practice, okay, what colors do I use? What techniques? Like, how would I achieve that? What's the composition even? You don't even need to use watercolor paper for that. So here, for example, I already had my sketch for the painting. So I had I wanted this more 2/3 is the field and 1/3 is like this intersection here where the clouds move towards. And I had like some other versions, like a little bit more more detailed with more hard edges here. So wet on dry. This was more like wet on wet. Looking back at some paintings, I realized I actually really like them. I think when I was painting some of them, I was like, no, I don't like them too much. That's why I was looking for the version that speaks to me, that sparks joy. But looking back at some, I'm like, wow, actually, they look pretty cool. Then this one we did, I think, during our painting class. I had a different version that I gifted away that was a little bit softer and different colors. But even here, when you paint something, you can look at it and decide, okay, maybe the colors are a little off or the colors you don't fully like. Because, for example, when you compare the red here, it's a little bit more like an orangey red. This is a little bit of a cooler red. So just even put painting paper and decide, okay, I want the red to be slightly different because this doesn't, I don't like it, or it just doesn't convey the feeling that I'm after. Like this might be a little bit cooler, like a more cooler day. Maybe it's more in the shadow and behind a cloud. This is a little bit more like sunnier in the terms like it's a little bit more orangey red. And also here, I started very small. Like I don't, like some, I just like can see it's I don't even know, like it's just random, but it's not random. I divided the paper in these sections, started something, like started just like wet into wet, maybe wet on dry, maybe some negative space technique where I'm painting around the red, the colors, how much pigment. And I had versions that were like some just sketches, like very quick, but some I'm like, okay, this is, I think I'm getting somewhere. So here, again, this was a study of different colors, wet on dry, just like what colors look the best, like in terms of the feeling that I want to convey, a sunny day, more gloomy day, something in between, and just practice or kind of like fine tuning the, like what I'm after, like what speaks to me. And again, this is a very gloomy version of something else. And you can also, again, play around with wet on wet techniques and different, you can see another smaller version. And just paint small. When you like figure things out, you don't need to start with a huge painting. Paint smaller paintings like that. Divide your paper in sections and just practice. Like start somewhere, even if it looks like a hot mess, if it's like, I don't know, just where you're like, okay, I don't even know what I was going after here. Just put painted paper, start playing, start figuring things out, and don't rush the process and don't just paint over and over. Be intentional. Really spend the time. Okay, today I'll figure out like what's the composition, like how would where's my horizon line, where do my clouds go, where are my flowers, for example, here. And then next step is, okay, what colors do I want to paint it in a more sunny way? Is it a more gloomy day? How many flowers do I want to even put into my painting? And start there, like put pen to paper. And then decide, okay, I think this is a little bit too blurry. I want to add more detail. I want it to look this way. And you get more and more clarity where you're like small paintings also look different compared to like larger. Look here, you feel like it's more like you're in the field. Smaller paintings are great for just, again, practicing even the color outs, like what shadow look like, the blue color, and figuring out maybe the blue is not speaking to you. Maybe it needs to be a little like a warmer blue or a cooler blue. And this is why it's so fun to like the process of painting, or yeah, developing your paintings is the fun part. Like, yeah, you have a beautiful painting in the end, but you feel more like, to me, it feels more satisfying when you have a version that you're happy with, and you spend the time, your effort in working on it, fine-tuning it, figuring out how to paint that, this and that, and you combine everything you learn and practice in this painting. And you can always paint it again later in a few years and look back at some of the paintings, and maybe you decide, I actually know an even better way how I would paint now with the knowledge and techniques I have now, and paint it again. But I just feel like sometimes people who start learning watercolor painting or any painting medium, they just focus too much on the outcome and just want this outcome to be perfect, exactly like they wanted, like the reference even. But it's just a side effect of really the time and effort you put into putting pen to paper, practicing, learning all about watercolor painting. That's why inside my watercolor membership deal, we always like learn the skills, the techniques, the foundations of watercolor painting and art, so that it's not random, but you paint intentionally, you practice the skills, practice the techniques, and get closer and closer to the paintings you want to create. And if you'd love to learn how to make your watercolor paintings look more realistic, how to build your own paintings step by step, or if you just want to paint the actual projects you saw in this video, make sure to join the priority list for my watercolor membership deal. That way you'll be the first to know when the doors are open again, and you'll get access to all of my best tutorials, step-by-step guidance, feedback, and tons of support. The link to that priority list is below this video, or you can scan this code right here. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.